Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Lucan Center. My name is Timothy Meyer. I'm the assistant director and the psychotherapist here at the Lucan Center, and I am joined by Dr. Brian Amorello. He is one of our therapists here at the center. In today's video, we are going to be talking about LGBTQ. We're going to be talking plus. We're going to be talking about that acronym, what it means, our thoughts, our feelings about the acronym, and a lot of what goes into it. So, Brian, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you for having me.
To start off, would you be able to give the viewers a bit of a bit of a rundown on your experience in working with the LGBTQ plus community, what you do, how you do it, that sort of thing?
Yeah, so I throughout my training, I've sought out experiences and supervision to work with, the various letters of the population. I have also sought out a sort of a lifespan perspective where I've really gained some experience working with kids, adolescents, adults, geriatrics, all age groups who have identified as LGBTQ+. I have worked with transgender individuals. I have written, support letters for hormone therapies and surgeries, which have been very impactful, and they are very excited when they get their letter, and because it means so much and it has such a symbolic meaning to it. I've facilitated therapy groups for the population. I've done all kinds of stuff. I've done, my dissertation research was on gay men. Lots of my other graduate school research was working with gay men. I've taught graduate school classes on counseling LGBTQ plus individuals.
So it sounds like this has been a real big focus for your career.
It has, and it's been an amazing experience for my career, and I am grateful for the work that I get to do every day.
That's excellent. So to start us off, explain the acronym LGBTQ plus.
So yes, so the acronym, obviously everybody knows what it's. So it's lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer, plus, right? Queer and plus, I like to kind of talk about how they are umbrella terms, whereas if someone can't identify with any of the other letters of the acronym, that's where they identify the most. And one of the things that I think is really important to kind of start off with is the benefits and the deficits to having that acronym. Mm-hmm. So the benefits are, right, you have more people, right? You have a louder voice, there's more advocacy, everybody can join together. Mm-hmm. The deficits, which I think we're going to pretty much talk about today, is really all of them essentially have very individual, different needs. And all of them, sometimes have really very difficulty identifying with each other. So we sort of call this like a within group difference. So within the group of LGBTQ plus people, we see differences within each of those communities, and sometimes even within gay men, right? Because there's intersectionality, where a gay evangelical Christian might have a different experience than a gay agnostic. So there's lots of withins and differences withins and all of that stuff going on. So it's good, but it's also challenging at the same time.
Perhaps somebody looking at it from an outside perspective who doesn't identify as that, they might just see it as, one acronym, one type of person.
Right. Right.
Whereas, each type of
Mm-hmm.
whether it be gender identity or sexual orientation,
mm-hmm.
is very, very, very different.
Yeah.
In that acronym. And then even in people who are the same,
right,
right, can be
whatever
completely different,
right.
too. So it's almost like we're talking about exponents here on how nuanced this gets. But from an outsider's perspective, it's just one box.
Well, and I think that heterosexual, cisgendered people, I think, get confused a lot because of that. Right? Is it gender? Is it sexual orientation? Is that the same thing now? Like, is a transgender male a lesbian, or like it's confusing, And what I say to a lot of heterosexual cisgendered people who come to me and say, I'm confused, right? It's okay to be confused, mm-hmm. right? And it's okay to show that vulnerability, but educate yourself, right? And one of the challenges, I think, for many of these communities that we're talking about right now is they're ever changing, right? There are countless terms for gender now, right? There are also countless terms for sexual orientation now, right? So LGB, right? It's a very objective, right? That's why we have kind of the Q and the plus at the end, because those are more umbrella terms.
Right.
You know, and queer, I mean, queer's been a term we've used for like eons of like years. You know, if you Google what queer means, right, you'll see things come up like strange or weird. I mean, you'll see all kinds of definitions for it. One of the definitions that I've used for my dissertation research specifically was deviation from the norm, right? So I can't really identify with a specific letter of this acronym or whatnot, but I'm not what society would coin as normal.
Interesting.
Sort of yeah.
Okay. Okay. Talk to me about how, you know, we have this dynamic LGBTQ plus in a box.
Yes.
Right. And I think putting all of that in a box based off what you're explaining, the complications, I'm just thinking about those exponents. There can be so many complications that go along with that. Would you be able to speak about all those complications? Of course not. But
no.
What are one or two that sort of come up in your mind about what you would hope the viewer would know, and maybe shed some light on something?
Well, and I think one we can go into a little bit more, right? You can't assume, right? The B is not the T, is not the L, is not the G, is not, right? They have a very different set of individual needs, and I think we're going to kind of touch upon some of them in a couple of minutes, but that's definitely one thing that everybody needs to know. And the other thing that I think people need to know is that they recognize that, right? I as a gay man, right, can, in all honesty, by no means identify with a transgendered male, right? Their experience and my experience are two very different things. I would assume, I would think that, you know, given I think society, there's a newness to the trans population. I think Caitlyn Jenner has been sort of the person to perpetuate and start all of that. But I think that's a good thing, right? But gay men, we've been talking about gay men since, you know, the 60s and the 70s especially, and even into the 80s with, you know, the HIV and AIDS movements and things like that. So, you know, again, we're on very different, in terms of, you know, time, there's very different timelines for all of these populations. And we get that, right? We totally get that. But I feel there's a safeness in, you know what, let's join together, right? And when we go to, you know, the gay pride parade, right, there's obviously the trans elements of it, right, and the queer elements of it now, right? Because we can advocate together, and whenever you kind of combine forces, you always have a louder voice.
Right. Okay. So it's both empowering and louder voice, and with the risk of it being very limiting.
Yes.
Interesting.
Yes.
Brian, from your point of view, obviously you have a lot of experience with this. You're a psychologist. You work a lot with this. What are some unique needs that have come up a lot for you that you've seen in each part of this LGBTQ plus community?
I mean, that's a loaded question. We can talk, I mean, there's countless needs individually, right? Again, you're going to add the intersecting identities, you're going to add racial and ethnic background and religious factors, and that's going to impact different needs that each of those people within those letters of the acronym need. So, you know, to just point off what are some very unique needs that I've come across, you know, for example, you know, lesbian and gay men may have different needs around parenting, right? Lesbians can, you know, on some level, right, conceive. They can carry a baby. It's much easier for them to kind of go through the path towards parenthood. Gay men, you know, some states it's still not even legal. You know, there's significant challenges. And most of my dissertation research in grad school was looking at some of the process, right? I mean, there was like 23 steps, and then maybe they'll get approved, that a gay man or a gay male couple needs to go through in order to reach the path to parenthood. You know, so I mean that can be a very mentally draining process and create all kinds of anxiety and depression, and you know, having people come into your lives and check everything and make sure you're suitable, you know, a little bit more so than the heterosexual, you know, cisgendered person that wants to go adopt. You know, just because of your sexual orientation, you have all of this invasion of your privacy, essentially. bisexual individuals have tons of unique needs. Bisexual individuals, probably more than any other letter of the acronym, the B obviously, probably feel more marginalized than anybody, because what we'll see in that community is they'll try to identify with straight people or heterosexual people. They'll try to identify with gay people or lesbians, and they have difficulty in that. You know, like I said earlier, I identify as a gay man, and I have friends in my personal life that will say to me all the time, I don't get bisexuality. Or a lot of people will say, like, bisexual is just a nice way of saying, like, they're gay because they really don't want their family to think that there's no hope of them being with someone of the opposite gender. You know, so there's like a safeness to it, which is sometimes the case, especially for a younger individual that you might be working with. But, you know, I mean, bisexuality we see of all ages.
Yeah, and also I guess I'm thinking, you know, for individuals who truly identify as bisexual, you know, the message that I just heard you say is, well, you don't really count, or you're just saying that, or there's there's some other reason why you're giving yourself this label.
Right.
Whereas if that's truly them, that can be a very difficult experience.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's my experience that straight people have a difficult time with bisexuality because they feel like the person just doesn't want to say that they're gay. And I think gay people feel or struggle with bisexuality because they believe that the person isn't comfortable saying that they're gay. You know, and it's like, well, where do you find the attachment to, like, where do you fit in? You know, and I've worked with people who identify as bisexual, and it's almost always the first thing that they say. It's like, yeah, we have that sense of community, but we really sometimes don't, because we really struggle, and no one really understands us.
Interesting. You know, in with speaking with LGBTQ plus and a lot of what I've heard, you know, a lot of times in talking about trans, and transgender, there's a lot of confusion nowadays. You mentioned Caitlyn Jenner before, and how that's been very eye-opening for lots of people, and it seems to me like more folks are identifying as trans, and there's a lot of new words and new terminology coming out, and it's been my experience that a lot of people find it confusing. They don't fully get it. They don't fully understand it. So I guess my question for you, for the viewers, is, you know, how might someone who might be a little bit confused about these different terms, this terminology, how can they understand it a little bit better, or wrap their head around it?
Well, I think the first thing is you have to understand that this is ever changing, and it's true. There are, like I said earlier, there are countless terms for gender now. And I think it's just about taking I think there's two types of people when it comes to this, right? It's one type is, I'm confused, I'm just not even going to try to understand this because it just seems way too confusing for me, and it's just not even going to happen. And then I think the other person is like, you know what, I'm confused, but I'm willing to learn a little bit more. And that could be something as simple as a Google search. I'm always cautious, right? There's websites, you know, there's places where you can visit that are reputable, and you're able to find your research. I've also found that trans people don't mind when someone is trying to sort of understand a little bit better, because they sort of see it as that person being vulnerable to what they don't know, and they're actually trying to know so that they can maybe become more aware. They can maybe become an advocate or an ally. I mean, allies are wonderful, right? So it's really just about taking the time to acknowledge that you're confused and working towards being less confused. But a lot of people aren't willing to do that, right? I mean, when things confuse people, right, we move away from it, and I think that's still part of the problem.
Right. What in your experience with someone who identifies as trans, and they come in contact with someone who doesn't quite understand them, what might be the best question to ask that person? The question coming from the person who doesn't quite understand to the person who identifies as trans.
So I think the best way to kind of, you know, answer that question is for that person to just ask, right? Show interest, right? Show that you have a willingness to want to understand, right? I mean, I don't know about you, but I love when someone tries to really understand who I am and where I'm coming from, right? Because that also tells me that that person is not going to make any assumptions about me because they're asking me. I'm the source, right? So don't assume, you know? So I think there's, for the person who doesn't or is confused, I think there's this kind of element of, if I ask, I'm going to offend, right? But when you don't ask, you offend because you make assumptions.
Right.
You know?
Right. And I love the way that you said that. I think you're absolutely right. There's this element of like, oh my gosh, if I have to ask this person about themselves, then I must be some ignorant person who's not up to date. And then you end up making an assumption, which actually makes it worse. But just being human about it, right? And saying,
there's a vulnerability in that.
And saying, I don't really understand.
Exactly. And own it.
And own it and say, help me understand and listen. And you learn something. And you learn something about them. And for that individual to be able to educate. And say exactly who they are.
And that's a really good tool for a therapist too. Because, you know, the last thing a therapist wants to do is make an assumption about a person. You know, and there's no way you can understand everything about everybody that sits in front of you. Right? I mean, one of my famous lines to my patients is, help me understand. Right? Help me understand what you're going through. Help me understand challenges associated with your gender.
So you're saying that I don't have to know the definition of every single
You don't
term.
have to know the definition of every single one. No. And it's probably impossible
I think
for you to ever achieve that goal.
Probably. But what's important is that I'm open. And if I hear a new term, I say, what does that mean? You know, help me understand. Or
like the opposite would be like, ugh, another term. I'm not going to take the time to, you know, I'm not going to take the time to learn that. You know, which I think, the very significant needs of the T, right? Which, you know, obviously they have to go through hormone treatment, right? So very often, and I'm not sure if this depends by the state, but there are guidelines that transgender clinics, therapists, doctors, endocrinologists, who typically are the doctors that specialize in this type of treatment, have to follow. And basically they have to get letters from because some of this is irreversible, right? Surgeries are irreversible, some hormone treatments are irreversible. So we want to be very sure that the person is in a really good space emotionally to go through some of this stuff. We want to be sure that this is what we think that they want. So we need all these letters of confirmation in order for these things to happen. So when I was on my internship working in college counseling center, I wrote many letters, you know, that would then go over to the physicians who would say, oh, psychologically they've sort of passed and now I'm ready to. So they have to go through all of these hoops, right? Like that I don't, as a gay man, I don't have to go through. Surgeries, right? You know, modifying your body because you're unhappy with it, right? I mean, it's a whole another issue. And keeping in mind, I think this has gotten a little bit better over time, but there was a point in time when none of this was covered by insurance. You know, so, you know, and these surgeries are incredibly high amounts of money, which then causes a whole nother level of stress or depression or anxiety for the person. You know, so they have to go through all of this in combination with being misunderstood, as we were talking about, you know, and it's just, but you made a point earlier that I think it's important. You have said you feel like there's been more trans people coming out. And I think that's a good thing, because I think with the when a population like that increases, it's usually because of awareness, and we're more aware of it, we're more passionate about it, there's more advocates, there's more allies, and I think we're just in a better place in terms of that.
Yeah. And you know, you just made me think about, you know, an individual person who's preparing to get a irreversible, life-altering surgery is in the same box as the person who is sexually attracted to both men and women.
Yes.
And I'm thinking about, should they really be in the same box? I understand that on one hand it's unifying, like louder voice.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, I'm thinking, wow, that is a very different experience.
Well, and as a psychologist, one of the training experiences I had during my internship was facilitating an LGBTQ plus group, right? So I had a trans female, a trans male, which even they have very different needs, especially in terms of surgeries and all of that. A gay cisgendered male, a lesbian cisgendered female. I mean, literally everybody in the group was different, right? And of course there's unifying qualities with everybody, you know, and everybody, you know, one of the things that I think is great about all of the letters of the acronym is that on some level we support each other, right? On some level we all know that there are people out there that don't accept us for who we are. And I think there's a connection that's built between having that kind of belief about you. But again, right, all these little nuancy things that we're sort of lumped with other people can be quite challenging.
Yeah. You know, Brian, I'm wondering what do you hope to hear from our viewers? Anything that you hope to see in the comments, experiences, what do you hope for?
I think the main takeaway from this discussion, you know, is just about like that misunderstanding, right? And I know that many people who are watching this are like, that's me. I don't understand, right? And again, like you mentioned earlier, there's no way you can understand literally everything about all of the letters of this acronym. It's just it's impossible for me, it's impossible for you, and we work with these individuals. So I think the one takeaway is to just take some time, Google something, you know, make sure it's the right source, you know, write in the comments, you know, what did you do today to understand one of the letters of the acronym? You know, just try to understand, right? Because if you can, like I said earlier, if you can get past that I'm confused, I don't want to go there stage, I mean, the possibilities are endless.
I like that a lot.
Yeah.
I like that a lot, and also for the viewers, I you know, we would love to hear any questions.
Yeah, questions.
You know, it's a shame that these videos can only be as long as they are because there's so much more to say. But to any viewer out there, if you have any further questions about this, there are a lot of questions out there. You know, I really do encourage you all to drop a comment below.
Yeah. Or even, you know, tell us how you're becoming an ally. You know, allies, I always say the advancement of a marginalized population is only as strong as its allies, right? And, you know, I appreciate in my personal life even so much when I meet a cisgendered, heterosexual man, and he's just like, dude, I love you. You know, like you're like the best thing ever. And he, like, I just feel so appreciated. And I know that other people within the community feel really appreciated when that happens as well. Yeah. PFLAG is a great organization for parents of LGBTQ plus people to understand and form a sense of community and learn how to become allies themselves, right? And make us feel really, really good.
I think that's an awesome point.
Yeah.
Last question. Last ask for the viewers. You know, to the viewers, if you're watching this and you have any good resources as far as like becoming an ally or a helpful website that you'd love to put in the comments for other people to see, I really encourage you. I encourage you too. And so, Brian, listen, I can't thank you enough.
This was great.
This was excellent. Hearing your experience and your thoughts and how you think about all of this stuff, it's great, it's refreshing, and I just really appreciate it.
And I'm very grateful to be part of this team who is so passionate about LGBTQ plus issues, who is so passionate about working with LGBTQ plus, you know, patients, and you know, it's just an honor. And I thank you for having me.
Of course. And I thank you for tuning in today. And I hope to see you next time. Thanks.
Sounds good.
Hey guys, if you like what you just saw, please feel free to check out our videos in our library and also hit the subscribe button so you can check out our future videos.